Season 5 kicks off with quite the intriguing first episode, then follows it up with some Konosuba-level comedy. That shouldn't take away from the mystery of what's going on though, since Seir's connection to the Freya Familia is everything right now. It's the catalyst towards what looks to be the best season of DanMachi yet. Unfortunately, I won't be able to do weekly cut content until ReZero is done, but until then I should be able to do one every 2 episodes. So let's take a look at what those first 2 episodes left out and explore Seir's wishes along with Bel's rigorous training. A grueling process that actually had him picking up girls in a dungeon for once. Let's get started. Episodes 1 and 2, Seir, covering various interludes from Volume 15 of the light novel, then chapters 1 to 3 from Volume 16 of the light novel. The first half of Episode 1 ties off all the loose ends of Season 4, essentially showing the updated status of the Hestia Familia, along with Ryu's conflicted feelings towards Bel. Where we finally get into the true beginning of the new arc is with Seir's monologue describing her own conflicted emotions. It's an impactful scene giving lots of clues towards who she really is. She basically described how the way her life was now was the best life she could imagine, but at the same time it was nearing its end. It was the inevitable fate of those who lived in the mortal realm. So, with time constantly marching on no matter what, the day Seir always feared drew closer. We don't know what day that was, but as soon as Seir realized how close it was, that's when she knew that she couldn't let things stay the same way that they always were. She knew she had to act on the feelings that she'd constantly been suppressing. It was as she came to that realization that she began to ask herself some very interesting questions. The first was, when did the means of reaching her goal become her actual goal? The second, when did the lie within her begin to hurt her? Then the third, the timeless question of what does she truly wish for? The first implies that her relationship with Bel may not be as naturally formed as we might think it is, while the second makes you wonder what lie could she possibly be referring to. Whatever the answer to those questions may be, the key to all of them is her connection to Freya. It's one of the more major plot points kept in the background until now. So, with that setting the stage for Seir, the next is the event that's currently happening in Arario. You see, the Goddess Festival happens because Elegia does. With Elegia being this week-long tribute to the fallen heroes and adventurers, it was only natural to brighten things up with a hopeful festival after. The city would remain somber for the duration of the week, then the Goddess Festival would bring things back to normal with a grand celebration. This is important for a cutscene that happened earlier, since it was during Elegia that Bel had come across Eyes. The two were visiting the graveyard for adventurers, and to Bel's surprise, Eyes was leaving flowers at a gravestone. It was the resting place of the legendary hero Albert, one of the numerous heroes Bel read about in Dungeon Arario, which was a chronicle of the city's legends and its many great heroes. It was essentially Bel's Bible back when he was younger. Albert was the final story of said book, and he alone became one of the greatest figures to ever stand in the mortal realm. His adventures were so incredibly epic that fairy tales too recounted their greatness. So, given Bel's interest in Albert back when he was younger, he was very much intrigued by Eyes' presence here, particularly by the flowers that she was leaving for Albert. That's when Bel would notice the names on the gravestone too, which was his last name Waldstein along with his epithet of the Mercenary King. Now, he wasn't actually a mercenary in the sense that we know it, since mercenary here was just the name for adventurers back in the day. That being the case, it would be more accurate to call Albert the King of Adventurers. It was a title that only further strengthened the connection between him and Eyes. Given how insanely powerful both were known to be, it was only natural the strongest of ancient times be related to the strongest of the current generation. So, to Bel this was more than just a coincidence. So much so that he would actually investigate this connection more. So, out of curiosity to see if Waldstein was mentioned anywhere else, Bel would check his current copy of Dungeon Arario, but only find Albert's first name mentioned. This made him think back to when he'd heard the name before, which, as it turns out, was in the unofficial copy that his grandfather gave him. It was the version he read back when he was younger, and that was actually handwritten by Bel's grandfather himself. This had always made Bel question its authenticity, but given that his version had verifiable details that the official version did not, well, Bel wasn't so sure that he should be doubting it anymore. Either way, there was a good chance that Eyes was a descendant of Albert. Now, though their last names and powers seemed more than just coincidence, Something about all of this just felt off. Aiza's expressions didn't seem like that of someone visiting a distant adventurer, so there was quite a bit of confusion regarding who Albert actually was. Even more so when you consider what it was Albert did in his final act. This isn't something that Belle goes on to explain, but it is worth keeping in the back of your head. Fast forward now to Horn's delivery, and her just being here was very much a big deal. As Freya's personal attendant, it was very rare that she ever leave Babel or the residence. So for her to be out here was incredibly special. Now, if you're wondering why she has no alias, well, that's simply because Freya didn't want to give her one. She straight up said that Horn would never become anyone. Yes, that is very harsh, but it does make sense given what these titles are supposed to represent. I mean, if a title is given to praise an adventurer's greatest feat, then what need does someone who only serves have for one? That's not to say that she isn't powerful though, since despite her lack of an alias, she is still an upper rank adventurer. In fact, she's actually the only upper rank adventurer without a second name, a trait that makes her quite the unique existence of sorts. The meeting after was just speculation on Cyr and her connection to Freya, but the fact Belle had only been here for 6 months was made abundantly clear. That's right, from the moment Belle arrived in Arario up until now, a grand total of only 6 months have passed. It's actually pretty crazy to think about just how much has happened. In any case, the whole love letter spurred all sorts of thoughts from everyone else, leading to some pretty comedic lines from the rest of the Familia. Cyr's locker room talk had an additional scene with Ryu, basically involving her and Chloe. While everyone else was invested in Cyr's love life, Chloe alone noticed just how sad Ryu was. She then went to ask if Ryu was okay with it, to which Ryu would ramble about how Belle and Cyr were good for each other. It was the kind of uncertain statement that you would expect from her. This obviously had zero truth to it though, since the mere fact that Ryu referred to Belle as, well, Belle, was indication enough to show that things had changed between them. Moving on to Cyr's agreement with Freya, quite a few more clues were given towards their potential connection. First, her confession included the words, "I've come to love that boy because of your heart." Then after that, Cyr revealed how she was always Freya's tool and a fake. They were powerful words that came with some pretty heavy implications. I won't speculate on what they are now, but if you're trying to piece together who Cyr is before it's finally revealed to us, all these clues are sure to be helpful. In any case, despite Cyr being well aware of what she is, this request of hers produced a reaction very few ever get to see on Freya. She was genuinely surprised by what Cyr had said to her and perhaps even moved by her arrogant request. Either way, Freya acknowledged Cyr's resolve to follow through on her feelings and accepted her request to have one chance only. It may have been incredibly shameless, but Cyr wasn't going to allow the only chance she had disappear like that. It was the first step towards a betrayal that even Freya wasn't aware of. A last-ditch effort to pursue a dream Cyr knew she didn't deserve. This brings us now to the fight with Hedin, which you'd be surprised to know was anime exclusive. I guess we needed a bit of action, so that's exactly what we got with this level 5 beatdown. Now, Episode 2 was very faithful with regards to mostly everything, but Belle's training was even more intense than what we saw ourselves. As Belle would describe it himself, it was the most grueling 5 days he's ever experienced. It was before all that though that it was during their interview that Hedin would first ask a very thought-provoking question. He wanted to know if Belle did know how Cyr was connected to the Freya Familia, would it really change anything about their relationship? Belle thought long and hard on if it would, and in the end decided that it wouldn't. Because of all she'd given him and how she'd helped him, Belle knew that absolutely nothing would affect his relationship with her. Now, it was after 2 days of remodeling that Belle would go on to do 3 more days of infield practice. What I mean is that every waking moment, both day and night, would be spent here in the dungeon hunting both monsters and women. It was an intense training regiment designed to teach everything there is to know about dates. So, with the maxim that women cost money and dates incur expenses, spending money became the most efficient way to demonstrate sincerity. To Hedin, a date that cost nothing was doomed from the beginning. That being the case, Belle was required to hunt monsters in order to amass funds for his date. It was while he did that he would also target any female adventurers that he could. In fact, There were even times when Hedin would intentionally create a past parade, then send them towards unsuspecting women just so Belle could gallantly save them. This was in order to trigger the suspension bridge effect, which would in turn realistically emulate scenarios of women falling in love with him. It had genuinely helped him to become more experienced with them, all while training him to be ready for every possible sort of reaction. Every woman had different levels of sensitivity requiring varying degrees of service and devotion, so this was what Belle was learning over and over again. He would learn how best to react to all of them, then use those lessons to please Cyr the best he could. If he ever disappointed a woman while training, then Hedin would shock him with an ultra-short cast lightning bolt. So all in all, this was truly the most difficult 5 days that Belle had ever experienced. He wasn't allowed to sleep, rest, or even feel sick, since when I say that every waking moment was spent picking up girls in a dungeon, I really mean that that's what happened. Now, the last thing before getting to the Goddess Festival was Ryu's lifeless behavior during the 5 days that Belle was training. The closer the Goddess Festival drew, the more defeated Ryu became. She was stuck at a crossroads since she didn't know what she wanted more. She didn't want to lose Cyr's smile, but at the same time she didn't want to lose Belle's presence in her life either. It was a conflict of emotion that made her feel like she'd betrayed her friend. By now she'd fully accepted that she'd fallen for Belle, but it was those very emotions that were driving her crazy. Before, she had no idea how to process them, but now she'd finally accepted them for what they were. It was a particularly terrible time to do so given the circumstances, one that made her unsure as how to face Cyr and Belle. So, that's everything before the actual date, which is where I'll pick up from starting next episode. I hope you enjoyed learning more about DanMachi, and if you didn't want to see more, then consider leaving a like and subscribing. I'll eventually do these every week once ReZero is finished. Until then though, ciao!